this video, we will review some actual workplace injuries and fatalities with employees just like you and me. Many of these incidents occurred because 1 second was all it took. We are in no way disrespecting the unfortunate individuals, but feel that their stories just might get you to understand that these rules and guidelines are there for a reason, even if the event has never occurred at your workplace. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, because let's face it, when you're being unsafe, tragedy can occur in 1 second or less, no matter where you are. We hear way too often, "It'll only take a second." Ever really stop and think how long a second is? A lot can happen in just 1 second. Like what? Well, let's take a look at the velocity of a bullet. A .22 rimfire cartridge, which has a very small powder charge, sends its bullets on their way between 370 meters a second and 460 meters a second. Pretty crazy, huh? Sound travels through the air at the speed of sound, which is 33.3 meters a second in dry air at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 1,087 feet per second. A hummingbird flaps its wings up to 70 times per second. Shoot, that's nothing compared to a wasp. A wasp beats its wings 117 to 247 times a second. In a matter of 1 second or less, your whole life can change. We see on a daily occurrence employees just like you and me that are willing to push the envelope, not really understanding the consequences that are usually at stake. A lot can be lost in the matter of a second. Let's review some scenarios of workplace incidents that occurred because a second was 1 second too long. August 2012. An employee was drawing a chemical from a chemical tote. The tote was located on the tines of a forklift and was in a lifted position on the forklift. As he drew the chemicals, the tote slipped from the tines and struck him. The weight of the tote crushed his chest and caused asphyxiation. The employee was killed. All it takes is a second. Everyone assumes I'll be able to move quick enough if it happens to fall. November 2012. Employee number 1 and 3 field workers, along with 1 supervisor, were putting in posts. The posts were to be installed across 2 dirt roads to block an entrance into an 11-acre ranch, and from which a chain would be placed to hang a sign. The employees had completed digging the first post hole, which was approximately 16 inches round and 28 inches deep, and started digging the next post hole. A tractor with an auger attachment was used to excavate the post holes. As they worked, they had difficulty pushing down on the 3 sides of the auger to help get it started in the dirt. Employee number 1's sweatshirt became entangled in the unguarded PTO shaft of the auger, which pulled him into the rotating part of the machine. He sustained traumatic injuries that killed him. All it takes is a second. There are no second chances. 3 other workers were there and none of them noticed loose clothing. Take care of one another. The employee probably assumed if clothing were to get caught, it would just rip off. October 2012. Employee number 1 asked a coworker to help him start an old pickup truck that would not start. The employee sprayed an ether-based starter fluid into the truck's carburetor, while his coworker sat in the truck's cab working the starter. When the truck would not start, employee number 1 suggested pouring gasoline into the carburetor. The gasoline exploded into a fireball that burned his shirt, the side of his face, his ears, shoulders, and arms. He was transported to an area hospital where he was treated for 2nd and 3rd degree burns. Be sure you're properly trained to work on vehicles. Employee number 1 assumed that if there was an emergency, he would be able to move away from the hazard quick enough if needed. October 2011. An employee was removing trash from the warehouse using a forklift. He ran off the dock and was ejected from the seat. He was not wearing a seatbelt, but had it fastened behind him. The forklift cage landed on top of his chest, crushing his rib cage and sternum. He was pronounced dead shortly after the arrival of the emergency medical services. Rule of thumb: if the forklift was manufactured with a seatbelt, it must be worn. The operator assumed that he would be able to clear the forklift in the event of a rollover. January 2011. An employee was cleaning a pasta extractor. He needed to reach his arm inside the mixing hopper to unjam the machine, so he decided to bypass its safety lid interlock by making it inoperable. However, the machine was still running as he reached into the machine. The rotating parts caught his arm. The tines in the mixing hopper ripped through his forearm, breaking it. The company did not have a lockout-tagout program while cleaning the machines. The employee was transported to the medical center, where he received treatment and was hospitalized. Be sure to properly train the employees exposed to hazardous equipment with lockout-tagout procedures. He assumed that he would be quick enough to react if his arm was getting close to the tines. March 2008. A lineman received a call to bypass a faulty meter at a residence. He went to the house and disconnected the incoming power before removing the meter and installing a temporary bypass in place of the meter. He then went back up in the aerial lift and restored the power by reattaching the two lines. He was electrocuted when he contacted the two connections with his bare hands. It is believed that he contacted the wires as he was pushing them away from the bucket before descending. He was not wearing insulated gloves, insulated sleeves, or fall protection at the time of the accident, and he was working alone. All it takes is a second. The lineman probably assumed that the hard part of the job was done. Now it is the small stuff. Don't need to waste time for PPE. May 2004. An employee removed a stuck cardboard tray that was discharged from a folding machine. The cardboard trays were used for packaging strawberries. The machine had a guard with plastic sliding doors and was interlocked to stop the machine when the door was open. The cardboard trays got stuck in the machine on an average of an hour. The employee was able to open the plastic door in the opposite direction to bypass the interlock. As the machine was running, he put his hand into the machine to clear a tray. He caught his left pinky finger in a 2.5-inch diameter chain and sprocket. The finger was amputated to the first joint. The employee was trained to stop the machine before clearing out the trays. The employee had enough time to open the plastic door in the opposite direction to bypass the interlock, assuming he would be quick enough to clear a tray. Many injuries occur due to the fact that we as humans are always willing to push the envelope. We can't count how many times we have heard the excuse, "I've done it 1,000,000 times this way, and that never happened until..." But as you can see, it does happen, and continues to happen as a daily occurrence. Don't become a statistic. Just because it does not happen at your workplace does not mean that it can never happen. Let's take a look at some of the smallest infractions, such as bypassing guards, that have cost a serious price. February 2011. An employee was at a tree trimming job at a residential house, using a wood chipper to chip small diameter branches. The chipper's discharge chute clogged up. While attempting to unclog the chute, the employee removed the pin that held the access guard panel down over the chipper wheel. The chipper wheel had not come to a complete stop and was still rotating. The chipper wheel weighed 1,500 pounds, and when in operation, it rotated at 3,000 rounds per minute. While he was moving the guard, it came into contact with the chipper wheel. The guard was knocked off its hinges and struck him, and landed 20 yards away from the machine. He was hit in the face and forehead with the access guard panel. Another employee told the resident to call 911. An ambulance was sent to the location. He was transported to the local hospital, where he died. The other employee on site at the time was on the opposite side of the wood chipper machine and did not see the event. The employee assumed that just because the power was shut off, the chipper wheel would not be rotating as fast as it was, allowing him to correct the deficiency. May 2011. Employee number 1 and a coworker, both maintenance employees, were cleaning sand out of a belt conveyor because it went off track due to excess flow of sand from a mixer. One of the employees removed part of the tail pulley guard to adjust the bearing. In addition, they tried to remove the sand with shovels, but the task was too overwhelming. The maintenance supervisor was consulted. He sent 3 additional employees to assist with the situation. Employees were positioned across a 40-foot wide mezzanine deck, with one of them located at the control panel. The maintenance lead signaled the control operator to turn on or off the belt conveyor. When the conveyor was off, the employees would go in and under the conveyor belt to remove the sand using their arms, hands, shovels, and a vacuum cleaner. The maintenance lead would then signal to turn on the belt conveyor. This went on approximately 3 or 4 times. While the belt conveyor was supposed to be turned off, employee number 1 was using his left hand and arm to clean out the excess sand near the unguarded tail pulley. The control panel operator turned on the belt conveyor that caught and amputated his left arm in the tail pulley. He was taken to a medical center where he underwent surgical procedures and was then hospitalized for post-operative care. Once again, ensure proper lockout-tagout protocol is followed. Employee number 1 assumed that he would be fast enough to clear his left hand and arm away from the unguarded tail pulley. June 2008. An employee was cleaning a meat slicer. The meat slicer was equipped with a safety feature that would have prevented operating the blade when its guards were removed. However, the employee had bypassed this safety feature and turned the unguarded machine on by holding the shaft or pin and securing the guard to the machine in its place with his left hand. He then grabbed a bleach-soaked towel with his right hand and rubbed it against the unguarded running blade. The towel was caught by the blade and dragged the employee's right fingers to the exposed portion of the blade, amputating his right index finger and lacerating his right middle finger. The employee was taken to the hospital by paramedics where he received a revision amputation without reattachment on his right index finger. He also received a few stitches on his middle finger. The employee probably assumed that I have done this a dozen times before, or I've seen others do it, and they came out unscathed. I will be quick enough to remove my hand if need be. October 2006. A worker was cleaning under a food batter machine. He removed the guard to obtain a better access to the area that surrounded the machine. The worker placed his hand under the machine to clean it while it operated. His hand got caught in the machine and he was hospitalized, having sustained a middle finger amputation. Never remove or bypass any guards. The worker probably assumed he could remove his hand quick enough if he felt any pinch. If the machinery or equipment was manufactured with a guard, it must not be removed. If it does need to be removed for maintenance, be sure to follow the instructions located in the operator's manual. It will have safety procedures for you to follow. Oh, and by the way, this is really important, be sure you are trained to perform the maintenance. On occasion, we happen to see 1 or 2 employees who were doing everything right. For example, training had occurred, all guards were in place on the equipment, and all personal protective equipment was being worn. Then they remove their PPE and realize they need to make one more change that will only take a second, but without putting their PPE back on. Here are some scenarios. March 2012. An equipment operator had been working for 10 minutes performing his duties. At the time of the accident, he was performing a regularly assigned task of cutting an access way in a chain link fence in the attempt to gain access to the grass area next to the freeway. It was early in the morning and still dark when they started work. The employee noticed there was a wire a few inches off the ground that created a tripping hazard in the access hole they had cut in the fence. He raised his tinted glasses for increased visibility to cut the wire. The wire was under tension. It snapped back, hitting the employee in the eye. The injured employee was transported to the hospital. Always be sure to wear your PPE when required. The equipment operator assumed that he'd had no close calls while wearing his PPE. What were the odds of it happening when he was not wearing them? January 2011. An employee was installing 2 hose clamps on a piece of equipment. The hose clamps were a bit larger than the fitting, so when tightened, there was excess metal strap sticking out. He did not want other employees to get hurt with the excess metal strap, so he decided to remove the excess amount. He traveled to a tool cabinet to obtain pliers for the work. He removed his eye protection to look for the pliers. When he found them, he went back to cut the excess metal strap and forgot to put his eye protection back over his eyes. He was wearing the eye protection on top of his head. He cut the first strap with his right hand while holding the strap with his left hand. He had no problem with the first strap. While attempting to cut the second strap, his hand got tired and could not cut the piece single-handed, so he used both of his hands to cut the second metal strap. As he squeezed hard to cut it, the metal strap snapped and flew into his left eye, causing a cornea laceration. He was transported to a hospital where he was treated and released the same day. Always be sure to wear your PPE when required. The equipment operator assumed that he'd had no close calls while wearing his PPE. What were the chances of it happening when he was not wearing them? March 2010. A construction laborer was attempting to start the pump on a tar kettle when hot tar shot out of the kettle and landed on his hands and on the back of his neck. The temperature of the asphalt tar was approximately 500 degrees Fahrenheit. He was wearing safety glasses, safety shield, hard hat, long sleeve shirt, pants, boots, and gloves. However, seconds prior to the accident, he took his gloves off in order to pull start the pump motor. He was first seen in the emergency room and then transferred to a medical center where he was admitted for intensive care of his burns. A skin graft to his left hand was performed. The construction laborer probably assumed that he'd been careful enough not to get any tar on him while wearing the appropriate PPE. What harm could be done if he was very careful and didn't bother to put the PPE back on? So whether you're in a hurry, or you just feel that there's no need to put back on the guard or your PPE because it will only take a second, remember what you've heard and seen in this video. Take the time and do it correctly so you can get a second chance. If not, you, your family, or your friends could regret it for the rest of their lives, even if it is only for that 1 second.